to everyone. I want to welcome you all, and in particular to thank our panelists on behalf of Migration Mobilities Bristol and the Centre for Black Humanities. So welcome everyone. Our strapline at Migration Mobilities Bristol is new thinking on people and movement. We want to promote new ways of thinking about migration, and crucial to those new ways of thinking is, of course, recognition of long processes, because new thinking doesn't just come from the air, it has to be historically rooted, which means that we have to look at histories of colonialism, slavery, nationalism, and racism, and how they shape our contemporary world and cast shadows over our futures. And of course, thinking isn't separate from acting, and neither is it something that only academics do. We all think and act, and promoting new thinking on people and movement isn't just for the sake of it, so it's to help us develop tools for justice. So we're really happy to co-host this webinar, and I would like to say particular thanks to Anne Singleton, MMB Strategic Lead on Policy, and Nadine Finch, the MMB Senior Policy Associate, and Luke Daniels from Caribbean Labour Solidarity, who've done all the organising and put the programme together. I'm pleased to say that MMB, CBH, and our keynote speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Commission, will be meeting the University of Bristol Vice-Chancellor in a couple of weeks' time to discuss some of the topics of this webinar. The University of Bristol's Vice-Chancellor, Hugh Brady, is unable to attend today and has asked me to read the following statement on his behalf. Professor Hugh Brady, Vice-Chancellor and President of the University of Bristol, sends his sincere apologies for being unable to join us this afternoon. He has asked that I extend a very warm welcome to His Excellency Ambassador Commission. Professor Brady looks forward to their meeting separately in order to explore ways to build collaboration in areas of mutual academic and public interest between Bristol and Barbados. He adds that, as an institution founded in 1909, the University of Bristol was not a direct beneficiary of the slave trade. However, we fully acknowledge our institution benefited indirectly via philanthropic support from families who have made money from businesses that profited from enslaved labour. We work to interrogate the university's history and debate how we should respond to our past in order to shape our future as an inclusive university community, and that is ongoing. This event will help to further inform our approach to this most important work, and he thanks you all for taking part. So we've got a very packed programme, so I'd now like to turn over to our chair from the Centre for Black Humanities, Jessica Moody, to get us started. Thanks very much, everyone, and thanks to Jessica for chairing.
Hey, thank you very much, Bridget. So as Bridget says, my name is Jessica Moody. I'm a senior lecturer in public history at the University of Bristol and a member of the Centre for Black Humanities, co-hosting this event. So the Centre for Black Humanities brings together researchers looking at the history and culture of people of African descent, including art and intellectual work. And it gives me great pleasure today to welcome all attendees and panelists to this important event. I just wanted to go through a few housekeeping issues, first of all. So the chat is open on this webinar. You can use the chat to share your thoughts or any comments, but I do ask that you are respectful of each other and the panelists. If you want to pose a question to our panelists, then we please ask you to use the Q&A function in Zoom, and you can post your question there. We should have some time at the end of this session, maybe around 10 to 15 minutes if everything runs to time, where we can pose these questions. Just so you know, we are recording this event. As it's a webinar format, it's only the panelists that will be recorded. So today's event is structured into 3 sections. The first will consider transnational perspectives. The second section brings in artistic inspirations. And the third section brings us back to Bristol. So first of all, transnational perspectives. I'd like to introduce our first panel on transnational perspectives and our first speaker, who is Luke Daniels, who is president of the Caribbean Labour Solidarity. Formed in 1974 in London, the CLS continues to draw attention to the links between modern racism and Britain's involvement in enslavement. So over to you, Luke. You have 10 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jessica, for that introduction. I know there's also some information about CLS in the literature that went out for this meeting. But I also wanted to add that we're an organization that is not funded by anybody. And we raise our money entirely from members and from donations. We like to take ourselves as a forward-thinking organization, and we address issues not only of the Caribbean, but also of the world. Am I breaking up? Just saw that notice on my computer saying it's unstable. Is it here clearly?
You are breaking up a little bit, Luke.
So, yeah, sorry, apologies. BT did say there's some problem. I'm not sure what it is. Okay, CLS has been around for a very long time, and we've taken up many issues in the Caribbean and globally. Focus is mainly on the Caribbean, so some of the issues that we address in the past has been mostly connected with reparations recently. We think that reparations is one of the most key political and social issues facing the world today, and certainly for Black people, not only in the Caribbean, but in the whole world. At the top of our priority, we've got reparations for Haiti, justice for Haiti, action on the environment, and some of you may have seen the news today on Grenada, the difficulties that they are facing with global warming. Justice for Haiti has been in the news quite a lot recently because of the pressures from not only from the environment, but political issues that face them that are historical in many ways. We also have our agenda, the curriculum, concerning the curriculum, which is about content in the curriculum. When the scandal is we actively engage with only just recently. As you can see, some of our priorities are linked to reparations, but we feel the issue is one of the most significant. The enslavement of Africans for over 400 years, one of the biggest crimes in recent history, modern history. We continue to be affected at almost every level on a daily basis. We only have to notice, what happens with crime. With young men, they feel the pressure quite a lot from the society in terms of the justice system. Most likely to be stopped, most likely to be arrested, most likely a sentence, most likely to get a longer sentence than most. And we know the justice system is inherently racist and fails our young. And recent events with COVID has exposed even more of that racism that is so inherent in our society. We see even in lockdown that the people who will be stopped most will be Black people and the ones that are most likely to be charged. And it continues on from there. The people most affected by the whole COVID experience that we're still going through are likely to be Black people. People of services, nurses, doctors, also bus drivers, people, delivery people, most affected. In many ways, we've faced a disproportionate amount of the suffering really caused by the COVID pandemic. And so when we argue for reparations, it's also about raising awareness about racism, a racism that has been entrenched, as I said, for over 400 years by an ideology that needed to support the enslavement of Africans for profit. And most European countries have benefited from this enslavement. And we continue to, feel the effects of that racism even today. But racism does not only affect Black people, it affects white people as well. And we think that that everyone needs to get engaged with the issue of reparations, fighting for change. Not only white people do have a responsibility on this because, their governments supported and encouraged for 400 years the whole slavery agenda and movement, and the West has did greatly from this. The whole Industrial Revolution was supported on the backs of slaves, the blood, sweat, and tears of the enslaved. So we think that, people need to as well get engaged with reparations. And we applaud the university for putting this on the agenda and making it nice. So we tend to look at it in a serious way. We've got the ambassador from Barbados, David, speaking on this later, so I won't go into much on the issue of reparations, the ins and outs. I know we will be updated how things are going there. But the fight for racism continues. The end racism continues. The see in which the Black Lives Movement has impacted in Bristol with the pulling down of the Olsen statue that was thrown into the Bristol Harbour. It was a point of interest, but we see that there's been a backlash with people criticizing the government actually taking action in some cases in preventing people from removing other offending statues that still remain. It's a big issue for us to continue to look out for. We need to have those statues removed that offend Black people on a daily basis as we go past them. It's hard to imagine why someone would put up a statue of somebody who is claimed as being responsible for maybe 80,000 Africans being enslaved, and children and women, of course. It's about time we got rid of those statues. We are encouraged that Bristol University continues to think about these issues and encourages others to. We feel that the whole idea around decolonizing the curriculum is something that universities and places of education need to address. Most people are not aware of the way in which colonialism and slavery has formed the way in which they view society. And we applaud President Hall for her work on creating a website which provides, amongst other things, a list of the slave owners who benefited from the 20 million pounds paid in compensation for the loss of their slaves. I need to remind these viewers here today that the slaves received not a penny. Finally, we celebrate Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Charities, for his ongoing work on reparations and his book, Britain's Black Debt, which says moral and legal claim for reparations for slavery. We pay tribute to Nations Scales as getting Glasgow University to agree to pay compensation to the University of the West Indies. We believe these victories are but steps to the final victory of the government, of the British government, addressing a conversation of potentially paying reparations for slavery. I'm delighted that Bristol University and also has invited the ambassador for Barbados for reparations, David Kuption, to be on this panel. We think this is the beginning of an event or the occasion for us to have opportunity to open discussions with other people in Bristol, other organizations, and not only Bristol, throughout the country, who have benefited from slavery. It's only by the together of ordinary people that we will actually achieve our goal of reparations. We've been engaging with trade unions and church organizations over a period of time, and we think it's important that we include the indigenous people in the fight for reparations. The government at this stage is not prepared to listen to us, and not until we begin to make as much noise and be joined by indigenous white people who will raise their voices, and sooner it's going to become so loud, the government will have to listen. On that note, I end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luke, and thank you for sticking so closely to time. Our second speaker on this panel is His Excellency David Commigion. It gives me great pleasure to introduce him because he is also giving a longer talk as a keynote for this event. Ambassador David is a political activist, former head of the Barbadian government's Commission for Pan-African Affairs, and is currently the Barbados Ambassador to the Caribbean Community, or Caricom, the Association for Caribbean States, and is a member of the Barbados National Task Force on Reparations. So David, if you could unmute yourself, and over to you, please.
Thank you, Jessica. Good day, brothers and sisters. Let me begin by thanking the University of Bristol, its Center for Black Humanities, and its Migration Mobilities Research Institute. I would also like to thank Caribbean Labor Solidarity and its president, Brother Luke Daniels, for recommending me to give this talk. I can assure you that it gives me great pleasure to be able to engage in this sharing of ideas at this seminal moment in our global movement for reparative justice. Now, I am speaking to you from the offices of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Bridgetown, the capital city of the Caribbean island of Barbados. And I am guessing that many persons in the audience would be somewhat aware of the pivotal role played by Barbados in general, but by the city of Bridgetown in particular in the transatlantic traffic of enslaved Africans, in the development of the system of plantation slavery, and in the making of the British Empire. In fact, there's a very interesting book titled 10 Cities That Made an Empire. It is written by Tristram Hunt, the director of the Victoria and Albert Museums and a former British Member of Parliament. In that book, the author lists 10 cities that played critical roles in the construction of the British Empire. And the second city on that list is the city of Bridgetown. The list actually begins with Boston. And Bridgetown is quite fittingly on that list because it was in the then British colony of Barbados that in the 1640s, the British establishment first developed and perfected a plantation-based production system for the generation of super abundant profits on the basis of the super exploitation of labor, Black or African labor. Indeed, Barbados holds the ignoble distinction of being the world's first out-and-out slave society. Not merely a society that possessed slaves or of which slavery was a feature, but a totally new phenomenon in human history, a socio-economic formation that was entirely dependent on slavery for all of its operations, for its dominant ideology and defining functions, including its very means of sustainability. Never before had mankind seen a society constructed totally, completely on the basis of human slavery. That was a new conception created by Britain in 1640s Barbados, and thence from Barbados, the model was transported to Jamaica, Antigua, to St. Kitts, and ultimately to the then 13 North American colonies. It is important that we recognize that these British slave plantations of the 17th century were the world's first concentration camps, places in which the sons and daughters of Africa were subjected to the most compressed and extreme terroristic barbarism. So the concept of the concentration camp does not originate with Adolf Hitler and the Nazis of 1930s Germany. Rather, that concept had its genesis in Black slave societies like Barbados and Jamaica hundreds of years before. And then, of course, there's the question of the wealth generated for the British Empire. The truth of the matter is that the genesis of the British and wider European Industrial Revolution can be traced right back to mid-17th century Barbados. Indeed, the combined sugar plantation, windmill, and boiling house in 1640s Barbados was the beginning of the British Industrial Revolution. There were no factories in Britain in the 1640s. The beginnings of industrial production were to be found right there in these Caribbean slave colonies. There was a sugar plantation to grow the canes, the windmill to grind the sugar cane to produce cane juice, and the boiling house to put the cane juice through various heating and chemical processes to produce sugar and rum and molasses. That was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And by the way, it was all run by enslaved Black or African labor. Not only the so-called field slaves, but also the blacksmith, the boiler, the carpenter, the cooper, the wheelwright, all enslaved African labor. And partly because the commodity of sugar in the 17th and 18th century was akin to a modern day narcotic drug. Back then, I mean, this sweet thing called sugar was totally new to the European palate. It was akin to a modern day narcotic drug, and the whole enterprise produced massive profits and created Britain's first billionaire class. The distinguished Caribbean historian, Dr. Eric Williams, author of Capitalism and Slavery, had the following to say about the importance of the little 166 square mile sugar colony of Barbados to Britain at the turn of the 18th century, and I quote, he said, "Barbados was the single most important colony in the British Empire, worth almost as much in its total trade as the two tobacco colonies of Virginia and Maryland combined. The tiny sugar island was more valuable to Britain than Carolina, New England, New York, and Pennsylvania together," end of quote. And so we can understand why Tristram Hunt has Bridgetown at number 2 on the list of his 10 cities that made the British Empire. After Bridgetown, the list goes on to Dublin, Cape Town, Calcutta, Hong Kong, Bombay, Melbourne, New Delhi, and ends with Liverpool. But you know, as I carried out my preparations for this talk, it occurred to me that Mr. Hunt could really have extended his list and added the city of Bristol. And I say this because I have learned that Bristol was deeply involved in the British transatlantic traffic of enslaved Africans. I have learned that it is estimated that over 500,000 enslaved Africans were traded by Bristol merchants. I also learned that Bristol's Society of Merchant Venturers, an organization of elite merchants, played a key role in breaking the Royal African Company's monopoly over Britain's transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans, and that thereafter, between 1725 and 1740, Bristol became one of the world's biggest centers of the criminal enterprise known as the transatlantic slave trade, generating enormous wealth for the British Empire, and that this continued right into the 19th century. And so, if Bridgetown and Bristol shared that 18th century imperial history, it is not surprising that they also shared the phenomenon of public statues celebrating heroes of empire and slavery. And I speak most famously of, first of all, in Bridgetown, the statue of Lord Horatio Nelson, the British admiral, defender of the slave trade and of slavery, four of William Wilberforce, and arch imperialists, the admiral who did much to help construct that British Empire. The planter class in Barbados erected a statue to Lord Nelson in 1813 and placed it in the very center of Bridgetown, right outside our Parliament buildings. And of course, in Bristol, the statue of the infamous Edward Colston, the Bristol-born slave trader and member of both the Royal African Company and the Merchant Venturers Society of Bristol. And that statue was erected in 1895. And Bristol and Bridgetown, it must be said, also share a common record of taking down these statues. And in the same year to boot, the year 2020, Bristol led the way for us in Barbados. You took down Edward Colston's statue on the 7th of June in 2020 and dumped it in the Bristol Harbor. We took down the statue of Lord Nelson on the 16th of November 2020, and it is now stored in a warehouse of the Barbados Defense Force. Ultimately, it will end up somewhere in the Barbados Museum. And we all know the circumstances in which these statues were taken down. Pivotal to it all was the public lynching of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement that catalyzed. And we in the Caribbean saw the images in Bristol of the demonstrators, the Black Lives Matter demonstrators, physically taking down the statue and dumping it into the Bristol Harbor. In Barbados, the Black Lives Matter movement did manifest itself in public marches. and calls, public calls by those marchers for the taking down of the Nelson statue. But the difference is that in Barbados, those activists and demonstrators were actually pushing an open door. The government was very amenable to the idea that the statue had no place in its location, that Barbados had no interest in celebrating Lord Nelson, and even the elite private sector of Barbados, the Barbados Private Sector Association, the organization that represents the Barbados Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and the Bankers Association, and those elite private sector bodies, they too approved the idea that the statue needed to be moved, that it had no place in a location that suggested we were celebrating Lord Nelson and all that he stood for. So I think this is perhaps, of all the movings, the taking downs of statues that have occurred between 2020 and 2021, perhaps the case of the Nelson statue in Barbados is unique in that there was no bitterness, there was no divisiveness. It was the Barbadian people and their government acting together to take down the statue. And how, and you may ask, was Barbados able to achieve that almost singular feat of the government and people, including both the activist community and the elite business establishment, acting together to remove a 207-year-old statue? And I must tell you, in the past, calls to remove that statue were rebuffed. There was much opposition to the idea. But over the past 20 years in Barbados, there has been a very determined effort to educate our Barbadian people about our history. In 1998, we established 10 national heroes, beginning with General Bussa, the hero of the great Barbadian slave rebellion of 1816. Incidentally, that rebellion took place exactly 3 years after the planter class put up the Nelson statue. And the Bussa statue in Barbados, we have that very striking Bussa statue celebrating resistance to slavery, celebrating that resistance tradition. So I think that effort, that 20-year effort, has gone a long way in opening the eyes and the consciousness of the Barbadian people. But another important element is tied up with the Caricom reparations campaign and the degree to which Barbados, the country that has lead responsibility within the Caribbean community for the Caricom reparations campaign, the extent to which Barbados has committed itself to the reparations cause. So let me tell you a little bit about the Caricom reparations campaign. First of all, everyone hopefully knows Caricom, or the Caribbean community, is a grouping of 15 Caribbean nation states: Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, Haiti, all of the familiar names, Grenada, St. Kitts, etc. And in 2013, the heads of government of our Caribbean community came together in a heads of government meeting and decided that we were going to pursue a claim for reparations for native genocide, for the genocide of the 15 million indigenous people whom the Europeans came and found inhabiting our Caribbean islands back in the 15th and 16th century, and also for African enslavement. And so 2013, our governments decided that we were going to go on that campaign and establish institutions to carry through that campaign. I should say that to some extent, we were taking some inspiration from what the African continent had done back in the early 1990s, when Chief Moshood Abiola of Nigeria and Ambassador Dudley Thompson of Jamaica had held the first international conference on reparations in Lagos, Nigeria in 1990. The Organization of African Unity had followed up in 1993 with the first Pan-African Conference on Reparations in Abuja, Nigeria, issued the Abuja Declaration, and established a group of eminent persons on reparations. So that was some early inspiration for us. But by the turn of the century, the Organization of African Unity was phased out and replaced by the African Union. And unfortunately, the African Union did not replicate those OAU reparations initiatives. So the Caribbean, in a sense, took up the ball in 2013 and established this campaign. All Caricom countries were required to set up national reparations commissions. The chair of each individual country national reparations commission, all the chairs were brought together in a regional Caricom reparations commission headed by Sir Hilary Beckles, the Vice Chancellor of our University of the West Indies. And over that structure, we established a prime ministerial subcommittee on reparations consisting of 6 heads of government and chaired by the Prime Minister of Barbados. Very early on, the Caricom Reparations Commission developed a 10-point plan for reparations, a 10-point demand that was directed at the governments of Western Europe who were involved in the colonial domination of the Caribbean and in organized slavery and slave trade. And that 10-point plan, I'll go through it very quickly. The first point calls for a formal apology from the governments of the relevant European nations. And of course, the government represents the institutional linkage between the present and the past, the institutional continuity between this present era and those centuries of enslavement and colonization. Number 2, a voluntary repatriation program for those citizens of the Caribbean, African Caribbean people who are interested in physically returning to the continent of Africa. Number 3, an indigenous people development program. Number 4, a program to establish relevant and needed cultural institutions in the Caribbean. Number 5, a program to deal with the Caribbean's public health crisis. And there's a serious public health crisis centered around such non-communicable diseases as diabetes and hypertension, conditions that can be traced right back to those centuries of compressed terror and malnourishment on the plantations. Number 6, an education development program in the Caribbean. 7, an African knowledge program for people of the Caribbean component of the diaspora. 8, a systematic effort at psychological rehabilitation and healing from the traumas of the centuries of genocide and enslavement. Well, that particular item is one for us, not for the Western countries. That is for us to do for ourselves. Number 9, a technology transfer program. Number 10, a process of debt cancellation of the national debts of Caricom member states. So that was the initial 10-point program, or 10-point demand that was directed at the relevant Western European governments. Subsequently, in October of 2017, the Caricom Reparations Commission added the additional 3 demands. 1, the establishment of a Caribbean Sustainability Fund to be financed by relevant European nations or governments. Secondly, that Caribbean governments be called upon to remove from places of public celebration all monuments and statues of historical personalities who were implicated in the crime of enslavement, persons who either committed or facilitated the crimes against humanity of native genocide or African enslavement, personalities such as Christopher Columbus, Horatio Nelson, and Francis Drake. And finally, that October 12th, the day on which Christopher Columbus landed in the Caribbean in the year 1492 and commenced the African Holocaust, and commenced actually both the African Holocaust and the Holocaust of native genocide, that day be designated Caribbean Holocaust Day. So you can see from the 10-point plan that when we think of reparations in the Caribbean, we don't simply think of a cash payment. Yes, money is a part of it. There must be capital transfers to help finance our development, but we don't think of it as an individual cash payment. We are more thinking about development. We are more thinking that as a result of those centuries of plunder and looting, of making generations of our ancestors work for nothing on the plantations of the Caribbean, in siphoning off the fruits of their labor. The fruits of their labor did not go to develop our own families, our own institutions, our own nations. The fruits of that labor was siphoned off to develop British and European families and companies and institutions and universities, and ultimately Britain and Europe itself. And if we are to repair, as a result of that history, we, the nations, the African and African descended nations that were subjected to those processes of looting and plunder, we now possess a fundamental right to development. And these European nations that purchase their development at the price of our underdevelopment are now under a duty to engage with us to help facilitate our right to development. And I must tell you that the Caricom, after formulating that 10-point plan, Caricom wrote to the 7 leading colonizing nations of Western Europe, including, of course, the United Kingdom. In fact, by a letter dated 18th January 2016, our Caricom heads of government wrote to the then UK Prime Minister David Cameron, informing him about the reparations claim against the UK, telling him about the Caricom 10-point plan, and requesting a meeting during the first half of 2016 to discuss the matter. Well, Mr. Cameron responded by letter dated the 22nd of April 2016, and I'll just read you a little bit of what Mr. Cameron had to say, and I quote, "Slavery was and remains abhorrent, and the UK deplores the human suffering caused by both slavery and the wider slave trade. These are among the most dishonorable chapters in the history of humanity, and the UK regrets and condemns the iniquities of the historic slave trade. In respect of reparations, I recognize that regional governments and Caricom, of course, remain seized of the issue. As you know, the matter was discussed with then Foreign Secretary William Hague during the UK Caribbean Ministerial Forum in 2014, when he made it clear that the British government does not believe that reparations are the answer. We should always remember the human cost of the transatlantic slave trade and do everything we can to ensure such horrors are never repeated. But I believe that in today's world, we need to concentrate on building for the future and identifying ways we can work together to tackle the shared global challenges that face our countries in the 21st century. End of quote. So basically, we regret this awful episode in human history, but that's a thing of the past. Let's put it behind us and let's move on. Let's put it behind us and move on. And that has been that has been typical of all of the responses from the heads of government of Western Europe. So we understand that there is a struggle ahead of us, that these governments are not simply going to admit the righteousness and justice of our cause and do what is right, that it is going to require a campaign, a struggle. It is going to require mobilizing our forces to achieve that righteous outcome. Now, let us consider, ever since those cathartic statue moving events in Bristol and Barbados in 2020, what developments have subsequently taken place in both cities? I took a look at what has happened in Bristol since the Colston statue was removed. I noted that in September 2020, Bristol established the We Are Bristol History Commission. The mayor established it to consider what should be the future of the Colston statue, but also to help Bristol come to terms with its history of involvement in slavery and slave trade. I also noted that Bristol's example of removing the statue seemed to have sparked similar takings down of statues in other parts of the country. It also seemed to have sparked a movement across Britain to reform the curriculum of many schools to include the achievements of Black and minority ethnic communities and to address the harmful legacy of colonialism. I must tell you that similarly, that is happening in Barbados. Over the past year, I have been a member of a curriculum development program of the Barbados Ministry of Education, where we have developed a history curriculum for primary schools and for the first three forms in the secondary system, and looking at our history. And I can tell you that in the new curriculum, the new history curriculum, the very last topic that primary school children will deal with before transitioning to secondary schools is reparations. So reparations will be on the primary school curriculum. I also noted that not only did Bristol take down a statue, but it also followed up on the 4th of October 2021 by putting up a statue of Henrietta Lacks at the University of Bristol, that unique African-American woman whose genes, whose genetic material has been the foundation of so many advances in medical sciences. And similarly in Barbados, very soon after the Nelson statue came down, a statue of Sir Wesley Hall, the great Barbadian and Caribbean fast bowler, was erected. I must tell you, we have 6 statues, public statues in Barbados, and 1 bust, and all of them of historical personalities who took forward the struggle of our people, labor leaders, slavery resistance leaders, leaders of our independence, and yes, and that is as it should be. Those are the historical personalities we should be celebrating. But for me, perhaps most significantly in Bristol, was the 2nd of March 2021 motion that was approved by the Bristol City Council, calling for the setting up of a parliamentary commission of inquiry to investigate reparations to be paid by the United Kingdom for its role in the transatlantic traffic in enslaved Africans. And I note that motion was proposed by the Green Party councillor, Sister Cleo Alberta Lake, whom I had the pleasure of meeting virtually just a couple days ago. This is very exciting that such a motion has been passed, and I hope it will lead to the setting up of the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry. And I noted, in doing my little research, I noted a statement by Councillor Cleo Alberta Lake when she said, and I quote, "We do not have the answers as to exactly what reparations should look like. That's why we are calling for a process of repair, which hears from many voices in our communities that have been impacted." End of quote. So that's Bristol. That's Bristol. Now let's have a quick look at Barbados. The statue was removed on the 16th of November. Well, the major development in Barbados since the removal of the Nelson statue is the confirmation by the government of Barbados that Barbados will be becoming a republic on the 30th of November of 2021, in less than 2 months' time. We will be removing the Queen of England from her current position as head of state of Barbados, and we will be elevating one of our very own to that position of head of state. Symbolically very, very important. And so that was one. But also, the other good news is that on the 9th of February 2021, Caricom's Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Reparations held its first meeting under the chairmanship of our relatively new Prime Minister Mia Motley, our first female Prime Minister. And the subcommittee refined and recalibrated the focus and agenda of the Caricom reparations campaign. And that new thinking was subsequently confirmed by a meeting of all of the heads of government on the 25th of February. And I just want to share with you quickly what is some of the new thinking. But first of all, Caricom has decided that the next phase in our reparations campaign is a very deliberate and conscious outreach to the continent of Africa. We are inviting the governments of the nations and governments of the African Union to get on board with us in this reparations campaign. You remember I said we took some initial inspiration from Africa. Well, the circle we have come full circle, and we are inviting our African comrades to get on board with us. Let us pursue reparations as a joint Africa Caribbean enterprise. And I can tell you that much has been done in that direction so far. In fact, on the 7th of September of this year, a few weeks ago, we held the first Africa Caricom Heads of Government Summit. In addition, our Prime Minister Motley has formally written to the African heads of government, formally inviting them to be part of our reparations commission, of our reparations campaign, sorry. And we have proposed that coming out of that first Africa Caricom Summit, that annually on every 7th of September, we will have an Africa Caricom Summit, a meeting of our heads of government. And we are proposing that the very next meeting should be dedicated, should be focused, if not singularly, certainly primarily on the issue of reparations. From the Caricom perspective, we have always made it clear that our preferred approach to reparations is to sit down around a negotiating table with the governments of the relevant European countries to negotiate a package of developmental programs, capital transfers, and debt cancellations that would deliver some semblance of long overdue justice to our people. And that it is only if such a conciliatory approach is perversely rejected by the relevant European nations that the option of international litigation will be pursued. So we are very clear that what needs to happen first of all is to develop a movement, to develop a mass movement, first of all, in the Caribbean, on the continent of Africa, but also an international mass movement in support of reparations. I like to say that we must make the demand for reparations into an international cause célèbre. We must develop an international mass movement similar in scope and power to the anti-apartheid movement of the 1970s and 1980s. We must develop a movement that is so powerful and so widespread that wherever the representatives of these relevant European nations go, people of goodwill all over the world are saying to them, but what about the debt you owe to the nations and people of Africa and the Caribbean? When are you going to honor that debt? And so we must look for allies. We are asking Africa to join us, but we must look for allies all over the world, including in the relevant European countries. So we must look for people of goodwill and good conscience. We must look to the labor movement. We must look to universities, student movements, women movements, the church, religious leaders, people of good conscience and of goodwill, and people who recognize and are committed to justice. And we must build that international movement. And let me now just give you let me now encapsulate some of the fundamental components of our new thrust for reparations. So I've already told you about the 10-point plan and how that demand is directed at the governments. But we have
I'm very
recognized...
sorry to interrupt, but we do need to move on to our next.
Oh, sorry. Okay, but
if you have any final statement to make, that would be great.
Yeah. Let me just end by saying that that basically 4 prongs. We are looking at the governments, but we are also looking at all of the private sector institutions, universities, companies that were implicated, that benefited, and the idea is to set up an international reparations fund into which those institutions will be asked to make payments. Thirdly, we are recognizing more and more that the currently existing international economic and political order has its roots in those centuries of colonization and enslavement, and to a large extent, African and Caribbean nations and people have been inserted into that system in a structurally subordinate and exploitative manner, and therefore we have to commit ourselves to a reparative restructuring of the international economic and political order and the institutions of that order. And finally, reparations is also about repairing any psychological and cultural damage that we still have, but that must be our own mission. We must engage in those cultural and psychological self-repairs. So I just want to end by saying that I think Bristol is well on its way, and Cleo Lake has outlined the right approach for devising what reparations would look like for Bristol. In the Caribbean, ours is a different reality, but perhaps some of the things that we are pursuing could give some insight and some ideas to the Bristol process. But I want to end by saying that ultimately, we must work together. It is one reparations movement, different parts, but all interconnected. And we must therefore find ways of working together to establish this global movement, and we must do it together. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David, for such a rich talk. We move swiftly on to our final speaker in this section, which is Roger Mackenzie. Roger is General Secretary of Liberation and has background in union organising and extensive experience in race equality issues, building Black self-organised structures within labour and trade union movements. Over to you, Roger.
Thanks, Jessica, and thank you, Ambassador. And thank you, comrades, all of you, for including me in this discussion. I want to thank you all, and I want to thank the university for putting on this really important discussion. But most of all, I want to thank my ancestors. Without them, I wouldn't be here. So it's really important that I give them credit for surviving slavery, for surviving enslavement, for surviving colonialism. And it is because of them that we're able to be here and have these discussions today. So I'm the General Secretary of Liberation, which was formed nearly 70 years ago as the Movement for Colonial Freedom. It was set up by Fenner Brockway, famous Labour politician, alongside other famous Labour politicians. Tony Benn was the former Member of Parliament in Bristol, and the likes of Barbara Castle and others as well. And we've had as our chair, and now one of our joint presidents, Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader of the Labour Party. So I'm proud to be the new General Secretary of Liberation, having spent all of my working life as an active trade unionist, trade union organiser. Until recently, earlier on this year, I was an Assistant General Secretary of the largest union in the country, Unison. So I think this is a really critical discussion. And I think the distinction that was made at the beginning between having a transnational look, a transnational panel, and then having a more localized discussion. As we've already heard from both the earlier contributions, it's a bit of an artificial kind of distinction, really, and I'm going to continue the tradition of trampling all over that distinction, because I don't think there is one. I want to start off by saying this, that anybody who thinks that enslavement and colonialism do not continue to have an impact on what happens to Black people in this country today are living in cloud cuckoo land. When you look at the figures that were reported this week by the Home Office, by the UK Home Office, that talks about 124,000 plus racist incidents reported between March of last year and March of this year, a record rise and at record levels of racism. Now, if you think about what that period represents, that was the period of lockdown. So many people weren't even out of their houses, but were able to still continue to racially harass other people. I think that's significant, as significant as the rising figures themselves, the fact that people were still able to do this. And this carried on at a moment when people all over the world were remembering what happened to George Floyd and many others, actually, not just George Floyd. But what happened to George Floyd was a real catalyst in terms of in engaging many more people in terms of standing up against racism. So while all that was going on, and while lots of people, lots of white folk were running around saying Black Lives Matter, we have to make sure this movement turns, this movement isn't just a moment, that it turns into a real movement. While they were running around saying that Black people were being attacked in the streets and were being attacked in our homes and we were being attacked on social media, all of this is the legacy of things that have gone before, and we have to recognise that. What I don't want to do is to repeat the richness, and I can't anyway, I cannot follow the ambassador's extraordinary contribution that we've heard this afternoon. I just want to point out some additional issues that I think are part of this whole agenda of reparations. For me, a significant part of this agenda is about restoration of what is ours. And what I mean by that is the loot that was stolen from our countries should be returned to our countries. And I think of the Benin bronzes, for example, still sitting there in the British Museum, with the British Museum refusing point blank to give those treasures back to their rightful owners. Now think of this, folks, right? In any other circumstances where somebody has robbed your home, do you think that it's right that you should have to go and beg for those things to be given back once it's absolutely recognised that those are yours? It's absolutely astonishing that the British Museum and other museums across this country, across England and Scotland, where I worked with Bernie Grant many years ago to try and get the treasures that they have from the Benin Kingdom returned as well, and they point blank refuse. And across Germany, they refused up until recently, and museums in Germany are now saying they'll return that stolen loot. Museums in France are now saying that they will return that stolen loot. Now, it's not just, again, as the ambassador was saying, these are not just nice things to happen. These are things that enrich us all. They're things that help us to remember where we came from, but it also helps us to say to those people who say that we as people of African descent have no history, it helps us to be able to show them exactly what our history is. So this, for me, is as important as the all of those means of means of reparation that the ambassador pointed out. We have to be able to stand up and stand tall in the knowledge that the things that belong to us, the things that belong to our ancestors, are where they should be, back in their homes. Not just as nice pieces of art, but these are religious artifacts that should be returned to us. So for me, this is an important part of restoration. It's an important part of reparation. So this is real unfinished business that we're talking about today. And I absolutely 100% agree with the Commissioner that it's going to take a movement to be able to deliver these changes. It is going to take a movement to make sure that reparations happen and that the restoration of the goods that belong to our ancestors are returned to the places where they belong as well. These are no small things. These are no little ass. They are big ass, because this is the biggest crime in history, as far as I'm concerned, that has taken place. And far too many people say to us, yeah, but this is so long ago, that we really, look ahead. Look at all the great things that we've done to you or for you, and I'm still looking for those great things that they've done for us, because all I see is that black people at the bottom of the heap still. I still see black people getting paid far less than black workers doing the same job. I still see black people being treated as slaves, as reported in The Voice just over the weekend with the strawberry fields in Norfolk, where black people picking strawberries in this country are being treated as slave labour, being treated terribly. This stuff is still going on. So this is not something of the past that we're even talking about. This is something of the present that we're talking about. So yes, we have to and we must build the movement that's going to bring about the reparations, and build the movement that's going to bring about the restorations of the things that belong to our ancestors. We must do that, but we also must build the movement that's going to tackle what is happening here right now in front of us. The appalling racist treatment of black workers across our country, a clear legacy of enslavement, and a clear legacy of colonialism. Because what we all know is that all of the belief systems that went around that enable people to think that it was okay to treat people of African descent so abominably all those years ago, and people of African descent so terribly during colonialism, all of that system of thought is still with us today, where they think that they are far too superior to us. And we must raise this issue of white superiority, because they do think that they are better than us, these people who are doing these things to our people. And we must be able to stand up and to raise our heads and to straighten our backs and to be proud of our people and to be proud of who we are and where we came from. We must be able to do that. But it only comes from us understanding our history, being proud of our history, and building the movement that's going to say we're not prepared to take this ill treatment anymore. So I'm proud that we are having this conference today. And I'm really proud to be on a panel with such great speakers and, importantly, activists, because I tell you what, this is a moment for organisers now. We need to have the intellectual debates, and we need to have the basic knowledge behind us to back us up. We must have that. But I tell you what we need to have people to go out and organise. We need people to go out and convince those people who are not at this conference, those people who don't believe us. We need to go out and to have the difficult conversations with them and to move them round, because I've been to too many conferences and I've seen too many reports. I've seen too many books of the films of the report. I've seen too many of these things to know that leads me to understand this point. Is that people do not move. people do not change unless we force them to change, unless we make them change. So the people on this call today, and Liberation, we're proud to be part of this conference, and we're proud to be part of the movement that's going to bring about that change and make sure we do get reparations and we do get restoration of what is ours. We cannot just leave it as a conversation. We must have it as something where we collectively get together and we collectively organise to bring about the change and to move those people who would come up with every single excuse imaginable to say that they cannot or will not do anything about what is right, what rightfully should be happening, and that is reparations for the crime against humanity that is otherwise known as the transatlantic slave trade. Thank you for giving me this time and inviting me along to make a short contribution. I'm really proud to be able to speak on behalf of Liberation today, but let's not leave this as a conversation. Let's go forward together and organise and make that difference and make these people give us the reparations that we absolutely deserve to have. Thank you, and solidarity to you all.
Thank you so much, Roger, for such a powerful statement of intent. We now move on to take some artistic inspiration, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Alexander de Great, musician and songwriter and former Calypsonian in residence for the BBC. And I believe you're going to play us some music.
I'm going to play some music. Thank you very much. It's been fantastic up to now. Thank you, David, and thank you, Roger, for your fantastic contributions. I've got two songs for you, but they're going to be in the form of a medley, saving time. History seeks to elevate people like Wilberforce. He had the slave trade abolished, we know of course, but keep it to those of the African race, to Santan Equiano with no amazing grace. Haiti was the jewel in the Caribbean crown. Napoleon fought Louverture but could not bring him down. And Gustavus Vassa wrote a true slave story. How come it's an English politician gets the glory? This is a year for remembering slavery. The history of Europe that is most unsavory. Not only politicians, but black people's bravery is what brought about the ending of slavery. When World War II ended, the French liberation was marked by a victory parade for the nation. The ruling powers met and made a decision. Paris would be freed by an all-white division. 60% of their army was African, 250,000 Algerian and Moroccan. But Churchill and Eisenhower agreed to the plan. France would not be saying thanks to any black man. No, this is a year for remembering slavery. The history of Europe that is most unsavory. Not only abolitionists, but black people's bravery is what brought about the ending of slavery. In the media, a new row has erupted, showing how young people's views can be corrupted. A rich teenage girl on a reality show expressed her regret that slavery had to go. This is no longer just a matter of class. When we allow these kinds of comments to pass, you find right-thinking people at every level, happily improving on the work of the devil. The time has come for demanding reparations, not only for the lives lost upon all the plantations, but all the British Empire's dreadful depredations. There has to be payment of reparations. Yes, there does. Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. National Gallery been playing its part, putting on a show of African art. Our forefathers' sweat produced what they see, while we stand in line paying money. Bring back the heart of Africa, give back the art which belongs to her. Bring back the soul of Africa, the wealth they stole she must recover. Relight the flame of Africa, let us reclaim the diaspora. Give back the art which has gone so far. Bring back the heart of Africa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The dark continent was raped by the rest, who carried their spoils north, east, and west, in skin and in wood, in ivory and stone. The carcass was picked clean to the bone. Bring back the heart of Africa, give back the art which belongs to her. Bring back the soul of Africa, the wealth they stole she must recover. Relight the flame of Africa, let us reclaim the diaspora. Give back the art which has gone so far. Bring back the heart of Africa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. In 100 lands, the African race is represented in many a face. Most other peoples keep hold of their past. Now must be the time for all are we at last. Yes, bring back the heart of Africa, give back the art which belongs to her. Bring back the flame of Africa, we must reclaim the diaspora. Bring back the soul of Africa, the wealth they stole she must recover. Give back the art of Africa and bring back the heart of Africa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa. Bring back the heart of Africa. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alexander. Wonderful. Okay, I'd now like to welcome poet Levi Tafari, who describes himself as an urban griot, the griot being the traditional conscious raiser, storyteller, newscaster, and political agitator. Over to you, Levi.
Right. Can you hear right? Greetings to one and all. I'd like to give a special thanks to Brother Luke Daniels, and to the University of Bristol for inviting I to participate. If you're looking at the Oxford English Dictionary, the Webster Dictionary, most of the dictionaries, and look up the word black, it's all negative connotations. You have words like evil, sinister, and wicked. And so Marcus Garvey told I, don't let your skin be a bandage of shame. This one is called Beautiful Like Ebony. I'm physical, I'm heartical, I'm positive, I'm black. Beautiful like ebony, the sun has seen to that. The creator in his glory, he created I black. I see this as a blessing, I give thanks and praise for that. Peace, love, and happiness, that is where I'm at. The way I walk, my style of talk, my whole rhythm is black. The food I eat, my favorite beach, you know that they are black. And when it comes to being sexy, those skills I don't lack. I am victimized and despised just for being black, physically and verbally put under attack. In the case of world affairs, I'm seated at the back. I have been excluded from history, which is ignorant and slack. I feel no shame, I bear a name which is cultural and black. I have added color to this world, and I am proud of that. I will stand tall, never to fall, and that is a fact. I am what I am, an intelligent man. I am what I am, I'm a conscious man. I am what I am, yes, a Rasta man, and categorically I am black. Thank you. So yeah, enough respect to Alexander the Great. Love the vibes, enough respect, sir. And Ambassador, yeah, very inspirational and encouraging. And also to Brother Roger, you know, speak the truth, man. It's a true thing. So I'm from a city called Liverpool, and Liverpool and Bristol were competing in the slave trade. And Liverpool outdone Bristol, which shows you the vibes that was here. And like Brother Roger said, things still are going on, you know, things don't really change. They've just shifted. So every year in August, they celebrate Slavery Remembrance Day. And this is a piece that I created for that particular ceremony. History can recall, history can recall, history can recall the days of slavery. My story can recall, yes, my story can recall those slavery days. Do you remember the shackle and the chains, the blood and the pain, the way they changed our names? How the sky turned gray when they stole the Afrikans away with their lives they had to pay. Do you remember the hellish journey across the deep blue sea, taken to a world of cruelty? The stench of the slave ships, the crack of the whip when death and disease took a grip. Do you remember the Afrikans they bought and sold, the perpetual lies that were told, trading worthless trinkets for gold, the huge plantations, the incarceration, the dehumanization? Do you remember Liverpool's part in this evil trade, the huge profits that the merchants made, the fact that the enslaved were never paid? An atmosphere of sadistic torture, the destruction of African culture enforced by an evil slave master. Do you remember how the enslaved worked in vain, cutting down sugar cane? The slaves had nothing to gain, working to death in the burning sun under the barrel of a loaded gun. In the name of Christianity, this was done. Do you remember it was through torture the enslaved were shaped, how thousands of African women, they were raped, the many slaves who escaped? Why Africans picked cotton, their living conditions were rotten. This should never be forgotten. No, this should never be forgotten, because History can recall, history can recall, history can recall the days of slavery. My story can recall, my story can recall those slavery days. And just to finish off, I feel that because we are of different hues, that people want to take advantage. So people are arguing over complexion and who is dark and who is light and who gets to move forward. This term of white supremacy is used. There's nothing supreme about being white, because the mothers and fathers of the human family were rich in melanin, were heavily melanated people. And so we give color to the world. This one is called melanin. Melanin, I love you. You mean so much to me. Oh, melanin, your beauty is far richer than the eye can see. My melanin embraces me from my head down to my toes. Oh, I would never forsake you. This I want you to know. You lie with me when I sleep at night. You guide me through the day. You take me to a higher heights. I love to watch you play. I often face verbal abuse when you're out with me. Some people haven't got my melanin, so they show their jealousy. But no matter what they say or do, it won't stop me from loving you, my melanin. Precious melanin, the pigmentation of my skin. Thank you very much. Love, respect, and honor. Keep the fires burning. As Bob Marley said, don't give up the fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Levi. And I just wanted to say, I saw you perform at Slavery Remembrance Day in Liverpool back in 2012, I think, when...
Oh, yeah, when Dr. Martin Luther King's son was, his son was here.
Yeah, in St. George's Hall. It was a huge event. It was very powerful. So.
Yeah, and was it the mayor of Macon in Georgia? He was here also. Yeah.
Yeah, good event.
Powerful.
We need more of that in Bristol, I think. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And thanks to everyone for listening, and thanks for the opportunity to express.
Very welcome, Levi. Thank you for our artistic inspirations. We now want to bring this home and bring it back to Bristol perspectives. And I can see that we should have Madhu Ellis presenting next, but I think they're having trouble connecting. So I would like to welcome...
Am I here?
Oh, there you are. Sorry.
I am here.
Wonderful. Sorry. I could see some other problem on Zoom, but wonderful to have you here. Brilliant. So Madhu Ellis is co-convener of African Connections Consortium, who have been driving the reparations agenda in Bristol since 2016, including through politics pressure and support for the Atonement and Reparations motion passed in March this year. So thank you. Over to you, Madhu. You have 10 minutes.
Right, I'll make this as quickly as possible. And I don't use the word I talk about we, because I'm just part of a group of people. Just to start off by saying we weren't initially involved in this at all. So technically, we're gate crashing. We realized that we needed here, and therefore we are here. As was explained, we felt that not enough was done to engage, involve, and recognize people who had been doing this work for many years. Yet again, it feels like people planning for us without us. There's a tendency to feel that people who are at the forefront of these initiatives speak for all of us, and this is definitely not the case. The ACC was formed in 2016 as part of a global African-centered organizations and individuals leading the charge for reparative justice worldwide. The motion passed by Bristol City Council in 2020 was a result of years of hard work by people globally and was first initiated in London by the Stop the Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide Ecocide campaign. In Bristol, ACC worked with Councillor Clear Lake, former Green Party councillor, Councillor Asher Craig, Deputy Mayor, and the current Mayor Marvin Rees, to develop the motion which passed on the 2nd of March by Bristol City Council. The key demand in the motion is for the setting up of a UK reparations process. We operate from a bottom-up model and not top-down. Our partnership uses an approach and offers a Pan-African perspective which seeks to harmonize the reparations organizing, strategies, and tactics of African communities around the UK. We have been very instrumental in the annual reparations demonstrations, which take place on the 1st of Mosiah, otherwise known as August. In fact, my joint convener of the ACC, Cisgendai Serwa, has been co-chairing the African Emancipation Day Reparations March Committee since 2015. The groundings this year was attended by Deputy Mayor Councillor Asher Craig and Clear Lake. We are very much at the forefront of influencing discussions and decisions at Bristol's Legacy Commission Steering Group. So therefore, it is very difficult to accept that we do not exist, and very public and accessible. Our concerns. Most of the focus by universities centers around the Caricom 10-point plan and some African governments. Yet there is no recognition that there's a movement here who are not represented by Caricom or African governments. We saw this happen with the University of Glasgow, University of the West Indies deal, heralded by some as a reparations program, which ignored the African heritage communities here and global family members who did not consent to the funds that the university had acquired due to legacies which arose during the chattel enslavement period, going to the University of the West Indies, which is still a colonial institution that does not represent the citizens of the Caribbean. The Caricom agenda does not represent or speak to the African diaspora, and it does not include all Caribbean people in the diaspora. We were never consulted on what should be in the 10-point plan. There are, however, 2 key additions in the motion which surpass the original motions. One, supporting African heritage community organizations in Bristol to galvanize support for the emerging Bristol African heritage communities led reparations plan from and in collaboration with wider stakeholders, including institutions, city leaders, corporate leaders, key strategic programs, initiatives, and cross-party politicians. Secondly, recognize that reparatory justice should be driven by African heritage communities' experiences, voices, and perspectives to ensure that advocacy messages not only reflect, but also respond to the real needs of the community in order to recognize inequalities. We as ACC are acting on these paragraphs because we contributed to them. No one can take away our rights under international law, especially given the fact that neither African nor Caribbean governments represents their diasporas. We represent ourselves, and nothing about us without us. Anything without us about us is against us. It therefore begs the question, how are we connecting globally? We cannot have branches of the African family in the Caribbean thinking of being treated as though they act for the whole of us. The roots must be the focus, and any attempt to effect and secure reparatory justice without Africa is doomed to fail. Bristol is not included on the list of countries organizing for us. It clearly seems that there's a deviation from the original plan. Not all the people or potential beneficiaries define themselves as Africans, and we see language as very powerful. When you speak reparations, it means different things to different people, and that is one of the things that we have to be concerned about. We believe there is a lack of community consultation and involvement. In closing, I want to announce that we are holding public meeting starting on the 21st of October to engage with African heritage communities to hold reasoning and planning, right? We need their input, understanding, and involvement, and we see this as a necessity, not necessity, necessity. It is important to reflect on the words of Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, chairman of Caricom Reparations, who said in 2015, Caricom not in the lead, which therefore begs the question, who is, right? How can Africa form part of any plan, right, when the branch cannot lead the root, right? Unfortunately for us, we cannot put this in the past, because there was a suggestion that we have to put it in the past and move on. We see this as a continuous thing. And therefore, we are saying, I rang my friend in Jamaica yesterday, just out of curiosity, and I asked him if he has ever heard anything about reparation. In Jamaica, in the Caribbean, it was mentioned, he says, we would never even understand what that means. That's something that we never hear about. These things are for you people in foreign. That's his words. Now, I'm speaking Caribbean because I'm from there. So I believe, even though there are people tasked with the responsibility to do and try and preserve reparative justice for people in those parts of the world, it doesn't include them at all. And we talk about grassroots. If we're not going to be able to impact from bottom up, it will make no sense to try and keep doing what we do all the time, which is top down. So that's what we're saying. And this is just a start of a discussion. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madhu. I wondered if you wanted to put details of your event in the chat so that people can follow up with that if they want to.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So to round this off then, I'm delighted to say that we are joined by Cleo Alberta Lake, who is an artist, educator, creative dance empowerment advocate, and community engagement professional. She is the former Lord Mayor of Bristol, and as we've heard a number of times today, brought the reparations motion to Bristol City Council when she was a Green Party councillor. So over to you, Cleo, you have around 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I'll do my best to keep to time. And I just thought it would be good to start off with some questions, really, to throw out there. And my first question is, will reparations be realised through rhetoric, debate, legislation, more talking, another report, a university paper, or any manner of conventional recognised methods of transformation? As we edge into more humanitarian and ecological planetary disaster, can all these big issues be solved or tackled by such conventional means? What place does human spirit and indigenous knowledge have in our quest to reclaim our humanity and our planet? Does the world and its dominant attitudes need to be tipped upside down on its head to completely undo a lot of what has been done, or are we too far down the road of destruction? Who has a say? Who can lead? What must they bring? What are our shared ethics? How important is it to link internationally across the African diaspora and to the continent of Africa? What is reparations? Who is involved? How do we have a consensus amongst African heritage people? What needs to be repaired? What has been lost? What has been stolen? And what is the consequence today? As a person of African descent, who am I really? Am I ever in my right mind? What is my right mind? How can more African descent people understand and embrace their Africanness in systems and a world that has been, is Afrophobic? Reparations is now becoming a much wider, more mainstream topic and concept as we edge from the fringes of ridicule to reality. Many were outraged when they discovered that British taxpayers were paying back compensation to enslavers up until 2015, which also brought the insults right up to date. Last year, reparations motions were passed at the Green Party conference and also cross-party at Lambeth and Islington Borough Councils. And in Bristol, as we heard from Brother Madhu, the motion was also developed cross-party and in partnership with campaigners, and was passed on March the 2nd this year, which happened to coincide with the 40th anniversary of the National Black People's Day of Action, which saw 20,000 people plus, mainly of African descent, take to the streets in London following the death of many African descent teenagers in a house fire, justice of which is yet to be served. The motion entitled Atonement and Reparation for Bristol's role in the Transatlantic traffic in enslaved Africans, brackets TTEA, note the language moves away from the term slave trade. And we heard from Brother Madhu also some of the content of that motion, and I will try and share that in the chat before I close, so you can also see the scope of the motion. Important to highlight as well, in Bristol prior to the actual motion being passed, there were a number of stakeholder meetings that were called. Attendance at these meetings was propelled in part by the backing of our mayor and our deputy mayor, which saw, for whatever reason, people who maybe hadn't attended many of the previous meetings over the previous years show up to those ones. The involvement of our African heritage communities was deemed extremely important, and particular emphasis and importance was placed on this by long-standing campaigners, namely Kofi Klue and Esther Stanford Koze from PARCO and Stop the Manganese, Recharge Ecocide and Genocide campaign, and also the African Connections Consortium. It's important to acknowledge the work of the African Connections Consortium and also the Stop the Manganese campaign over their years of service. And that can include the annual march, or what is now the annual groundings in Brixton, the Reparation Rebellion groundings, which always sees a delegation going from Bristol. Also, in terms of the reparations motion that passed in Bristol, that was looked over, edited and supported again by the campaigners. And it was part of their long-term strategy to go through local councils in terms of being able to better call for the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice, otherwise known as the APSITAJ. That is a major feature of the reparations motion and a major feature of the campaign work that has taken place over many years. Again, the idea of raising the motions through council levels that can then be elevated and escalated to governmental level. Where are we now in Bristol? Well, there is the emergence of what is being called the BPREP, which is the Bristol Pempamsie plan, Pempamsie being an Adinkra symbol, meaning to knit or sew together in preparation. Noting, of course, as my elders will tell me, education is preparation for reparations. Project Truth also happened this year, which was an extensive educative consultation via the Legacy Steering Group for African Heritage Communities. Project Truth stands for Telling, Restoring, Understanding Our Tapestry and History, with the aim of bringing the views, thoughts, ideas, conversation and plans from African heritage communities, understanding that we're not one homogenous group. Other things are also happening in Bristol that kind of work towards this idea of reconciliation and reparation. I'm glad to be part of a work package which is being managed by Bristol University, where myself and actually Dr. Jessica Moody here today herself, an artist, Kwesi Johnson, are involved in a project called Decolonizing Memory, Digital Bodies in Movement. This initiative seeks to research into sites connected to enslavement and the memory of enslavement in Bristol, encountering those sites with the creation of a new dance of the African diaspora that can tell our story thus far and can be a catalyst for understanding, intervention, reconciliation, healing, and repair in itself. I also want to acknowledge and highlight the work of Lawrence Hu and the Cargo Classrooms and Cargo Movement project to empower and educate on these themes. And also, more recently, an augmented reality app called Hope Immersive, which frames our African ancestors who were so painfully, cruelly, and inhumanely exploited and almost entirely stripped of their sense of self and place in the world. This app frames them not as hopeless victims without agency, but elevates them to being founders of many European cities. Reparatory justice will require new thinking, new doing, new language, new terminology, new leaders, new institutions, and a never before seen collaboration between Africans, African descendants, and wider society. I'm going to finish by actually reading a poem that I wrote during the book launch of From Wolston to Colston, Severing the Sinews of Slavery in Bristol. Someone mentioned this book in the Q&A in the chat function, and I would recommend it. Undying fame, or now dead infamy, the distribution of immorality, sanctioned by Royal Charter and Asiento, lashed together and legitimized, but always despised. With hands across the Atlantic, abolition, sugar beet, not beaten bodies, sweet tea, tobacco, and a cotton shirt, commodities capital from a cash crop in, killing fields. Contested? Lean towards life as liberators, repair, reconcile, and distribute morality like a wanted man, no longer mercantile gold. And with literary ladies and black stars, rise again, rise against manufactured racism and hate and class distinctions, reform, reframe, react, renew, topple. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cleo. So we have a few minutes for questions. As I understand it, actually, our panelists have gone through questions directed at them and have typed answers. I'm assuming that everyone, the people who pose those questions can actually see those responses, but let us know in the chat if that's not the case. I think because we're coming to the end of the session and there isn't a great deal of time, I wanted to just pick up on some themes from the questions. So there were a few questions here that asked about issues of solidarity across different people, across different groups. And that seems like a really important theme for this session. It's certainly how we started. So I guess what I wondered if there was anyone from our panelists, and if you're willing to speak on this, perhaps raise your hand and I can name you, is whether if you had any point of action for creating greater solidarity across the transoceanic communities that we're talking about, across Indigenous groups, across different factions, and what that point of action would be that we can move this conversation forward so that it's not just a conversation, because I think that's also something that came up in a lot of what people were saying today. So does anyone have any action points, thoughts of how we can create more solidarity for moving this forward into action? David.
Thank you. I just like to make the point that the Caricom reparations campaign is for both native genocide and African enslavement. But thus far, I would say the emphasis has more been placed on African enslavement. So much so that even earlier this year, the heads of government had to indicate to the Caricom Reparations Commission that it needed to bolster its membership with representatives of the native indigenous population of the Caribbean. So I think there is a fairly well organized movement of the indigenous people of the Americas. And I think that we need to do more to develop the partnership with that movement. I also need to say that the heads of government also gave the Caricom Reparations Commission the power to confer observer status on organizations, Caribbean organizations, but also extra-Caribbean organizations that may wish to have a relationship with the Caricom reparations cause. So I think the Caricom Reparations Commission could be a very good institution for building out that international movement, that movement of solidarity, and certainly organizations that might have an interest in having a relationship with the Caricom Reparations Commission. You could bear in mind that you could apply for observer status to that organization. Now that we have this initiative, this outreach to Africa, it is expected that that is going to materialize in a permanent forum of African and Caribbean territories and states, and that permanent forum is going to have some kind of secretariat. It may be a collaboration between the existing secretariat of the Caribbean community and the existing secretariat of the African Union. But hopefully over the next 12 months, we are going to have some kind of African Caribbean or African Union Caricom institutional structure to which reparations activism can be connected. So I just wanted to give that information.
Thank you, David. Thank you. That's really helpful. Roger, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just really quickly, because I mean, I do think it's important, those sort of structures that the ambassador is talking about, that we do take advantage of those. But I also think that we really have to concentrate on developing the grassroots organisation around this, and I mean, I think the Commission also mentioned about the looking at how we can look to involve the trade union movement in this, and there was an equation made with the anti-apartheid movement, which I think is exactly right. It needs to be on that sort of level. And one of the keys for me about the anti-apartheid movement, as somebody who was involved in it, I was involved through my trade union movement. And I was involved in grassroots organisations, and actually I was involved in direct action organisations as well, that were prepared to put ourselves on the line. And I think we really need to consider some of those things as well. And I'm talking peaceful direct action, of course, right? But I do think it's that we have to think seriously about building the movement that's going to make a difference. Some of that will be some of the official bodies that are around, that we can communicate and put our efforts through as well. But in my experience, you still need to move those official bodies, and you move those official bodies by grassroots organisation. So it seems to me that that's where we need to concentrate on building our activity, as well as contributing through the bodies that the ambassador was talking about.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Roger. I'm afraid we've come to the end of the session, but that feels like such a wonderful place to leave.
Before you go.
Oh, sorry, Luke, go on.
Yes, before you go, my hand was raised a little while.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to say that, I agree with what David is saying, and also Roger. It is a possibility that we can probably organize, that when I say we, I mean Caribbean Labour Solidarity, organize a meeting with the Latin American groups in terms of the indigenous and African movement for reparations. I will try and instigate something, because we, as I said, work closely with a lot of the Latin American groups. The other thing is we've already made moves with the trade unions, because we are also involved with trade unions representatives, and several unions have already put forward resolutions around reparations. We will continue to build on that, and we see that as a significant and important aspect of building grassroots organization for reparations. So I just wanted to put out there. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Luke. That's really helpful and really builds on, I think, what everyone else was saying. And that's a wonderful place to leave us on as well. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to all of our panelists and performers, to the Migration Mobilities Institute and the Black Humanities Centre for hosting and organising this. Particularly to our behind the scenes Zoom tech wizards, the School of Policy Studies admin team for technical support, and of course for everyone who attended today, shared thoughts in the chat and asked questions. Wonderful. So virtual round of applause, I suppose. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, good to see you, David.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, yes.
Thank you,
Okay, we keep talking and keep organizing.
Yeah, solidarity, everyone. Solidarity.
Yes, yes.
You too, Roger.
You too, Roger. Port connected. The Farai and
Let's work together.
hey, Alexandra. Yeah. Great.
Take care.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everyone.
Beautiful cheering, Jessica. Thank you for holding it together. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe. Stay safe. Bye.
All right. Bye now.
Okay.